Okay, welcome back. This is like a small break that the MC gives us all to straighten the ties and get ready for the next. Mr. Mittal, will you please bring on Mr. Pandey and Mr. Garg with a request that we have 7 minutes of a presentation. We keep it really tight. We have to hand this over to the next session in 20 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Sharath. I will have the honor of very briefly introducing Mr. Pandey, who will take over as the moderator for the next panel and run it. And Mr. Pandey is the Deputy Director General Radio in Telecom Engineering Center, which is the technology arm of Department of Telecom. He is from Indian Telecom Service, 1986 batch. He has more than 30 years of experience in various domains of telecom, and currently he is responsible for standardization in radio and satellite products. He is one of the vice chairs of ITU Study Group 5. He is an active contributor in the Working Party 5D of Study Group 5 of ITUR. In APT also, he is actively involved in preparation of WTSA 2021 and is the vice chair of Working Group 1. So this is a brief introduction of Mr. Pandey. And should I also introduce Mr. Garg also right now so that Mr. Pandey can start with?
Yes, yes, please do.
So, yeah, just a minute. So Mr. P.K. Garg, or Mr. Pawan Garg as it's called, is a former wireless advisor to the Government of India from 2002 to 2008. And wireless advisor is actually the head of WPC and has the onerous responsibility of managing the spectrum for the country. He was internationally elected member of the Radio Regulatory Board of ITUR, Geneva from 2006 to 2014, an honorable job. Really, ITU is the specialized body of UN for ICT issues. He was elected chairman of the board for the year 2013. He is an alumnus of Punjab Engineering College, Chandigarh, and has now 50 years of experience in spectrum management and planning of various radio communication services, both terrestrial and satellite based. Widely traveled since 1980 and has represented India on the governing council of ITU and spoken at large number of national and international conferences in his field, besides publishing many papers on related issues. So this is a brief introduction of Mr. Garg, and I will hand over to Mr. Pandey to start the session and to invite Mr. Garg to take his to speak about his subject. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Yeah, Mr.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible, Mr. Pandey, very loud and clear.
Thank you, Mittal sir, for the nice words. And a very warm welcome to all the participants. To cover up as far as we can come, as far as we can do. We have listened to some of the stalwarts from the industry, Mr. Lee, Mr. Ohmura, and stalwarts from government sector, Mr. Alawa, in the keynote address. All of them are experts in their own domain. And as indicated by Mr. Mittal, we have been joined by another expert, Mr. Garg, during the panel discussion on emerging global scenario in allocation and use of C and V band, licensed, unlicensed spectrum, and coexistence in new bands for IMT. The topic is quite interesting and relevant today when we are always hooked on data through wireless broadband and looking for the speed. Even now during this presentation, sometimes I am getting glitches. I do not know about the others. Timing of session could not have been better than this because try recommendations are under active consideration. Our panelists could not have been better than Mr. P.K. Garg. He is an authority on spectrum management. And as said during introduction, he has more than 50 years of experience. So before we carry the panel discussion further, I would request Mr. Garg if he could briefly throw light on TRI recommendation and the current status and the general aspects about E and B band. Over to you, Mr. Garg.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Thank you, Mr. Mittal. I hope I am audible.
Yes, Mr. Garg, you are cleanly audible. If you can, please bring up your slides, and please, if you can, I would like to listen to you for a couple of hours, to be very honest. But here, if we can spend 5-7 minutes and then get into discussion, because there are questions that the panel head, Mr. Pandey, has. So please, if you can make your presentation.
I hope my two slides are visible now.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So in the interest of time, I'll be very brief because many aspects of the discussion have already been covered by various other experts. And first of all, I must thank the TSDSI for this opportunity given to me for sharing my views. And I will try to limit my presentation and my views to E and V bands. Quite often, or quite generally, these two bands are taught together. However, as per because of the presence of oxygen absorption around 60 gigahertz spectrum, so this poses a little bit challenge as well as opportunity for the spectrum around 60 gigahertz. And let me also mention that these E and V bands, these are the terminologies given by industry, while the ITU terminology is the EHF band, extra high frequency band, from 30 to 300 gigahertz, and which is also referred as millimetric waves. So this oxygen absorption causes additional attenuation of up to 10 dB per kilometer. And as I mentioned earlier, that poses a challenge as well as an opportunity. Challenge for the long distance communications, but opportunity for short distance Wi-Fi type of communications for very large bandwidth. And considering this aspect, my thinking is that E and V bands can be considered separately for spectrum regulation and pricing. Even the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, TRI, has made separate type of recommendations and separate treatment for these frequency bands. Very briefly, the main TRI recommendations for E and V bands was first made in August 2014 as a part of their recommendations for microwave access and microwave backbone carriers. Thereafter, while considering those recommendations, the Department of Telecom, Government of India, had made a reference back to TRAI for some of their recommendations, seeking their elaboration and clarification. And the TRAI had provided their confirmation or clarifications on those issues in October 2015. So considering both these recommendations together, the TRI had recommended that E
Sir, I believe he got disconnected. That's the reason.
Yes, I think so too. That's unfortunate, but maybe we should give it 5-10 seconds and see if that connection will come back again. But in the meantime, maybe Mr. Pandey, you can think of how we can take up the questions in case Mr. Garg is not going to be connected back again.
Okay, then by the time he joins,
yes,
we can tackle the first part of our panel discussion, that was global scenario. So
right.
I would request the panelists, maybe Dr. Lee, if he can explain as far as V-band and E-band are concerned, what is the global scenario and trend? Because especially we know Wi-Gig hotspot in V-band is very popular in US. If you could explain what is the global trend and how these bands have been allocated in some of the countries. Over to you, Dr. Lee.
Yes, I can just quickly share a slide maybe that I can use to discuss.
Rather further.
So I think this is one of the slides I showed earlier, and I just wanted to provide some little bit more details. So for unlicensed, obviously unlicensed, and there's nothing really I can explain further than that. For some of the licensed, I think different countries has employed different mechanics of how they are using this license. For example, United Kingdom is using 2 times 250 megahertz blocks in licensing blocks in units of 250 megahertz each for different licensees. And similarly that goes on in South Africa. South Africa is also utilizing light licensing, where they differentiate into 250 megahertz of bandwidths and licensing these smaller chunks of bandwidth within this licensing blocks. US is a little bit different. They use a non-exclusive national-wide license in this band, where once you have a license, you're allowed to use any of the bands from 71 to 76, 81 to 86, and beyond. And Canada also uses a 250 megabyte chunkage blocks for light licensing. Just to give you some highlights of, for example, what's happening in US. So, for example, in US, if you look at the accumulated registered licensees in the 70, 80, 90 gigahertz bands since 2009, that actually has been growing quite exponentially. Recently, in the recent years, in the last few years, it's been growing quite a bit. And based on the trajectory, I think it will continue to grow. So there's actually a lot of interest and hype in these license bands for fixed wireless applications. Which is predominantly what a lot of the licenses are available for in the United Kingdom, South Africa, Canada, US, Singapore for short-term commercial licensing, and other countries. So that's sort of what the globe stands so far, and in terms of what the future may hold, I guess that we'll have to see.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, giving us bird's eye view about the allocation and the scenario in various countries. During the keynote address, we have listened to. Has Mr. Garg been able to join?
Yes, sir. He's back, sir.
Sir, yeah, you could complete your presentation. Garg, sir.
Yeah, my presentation is complete. And I will be happy to answer any questions from your side or from the audience as such.
Okay, sir. Thank you. So we have listened to Mr. Ohmura, Secretary General 5G MF Japan. In his presentation, what caught my attention was local 5G concept.
Yeah.
It will be interesting to know how did Japan zero down to 28.2 to 28.3 gigahertz for local 5G. What changes were made in policy to enable it? And also, if Mr. Ohmura, you could share your experience of field trial in Japan, I'll be grateful. Over to you, Mr. Ohmura.
Yes, so the Ohmura speaking. Thank you very much for your question. So in Japan, so introduce the our government introduced open market on not only the mega operators, but also small size mobile operators on private services as policy issues. So the regarding the 28 gigahertz is easily to introduce 100 megahertz as sharing conditions, and technical issues is as same as nationwide 5G services. So the 28 gigahertz is in the adequate to introduce using for the high capacities transmission. For example, the 8 kilo or 4 kilo video camera. So the Japanese government decided to introduce the 28 gigahertz first for the local 5G. Thank you very much.
So you think 100 megahertz will suffice for quite some time?
Sorry,
Yes, I think, Mr. Pandey, I think what Ohmura-san says so interesting that they have done the surveys, they have done 8, 13, and then 28 different projects in 3 years, and come to conclude that 100 megahertz in the 28 gigahertz range is sufficient for all the private operator type services, including the 8K camera surveillance type services. Yes, it's really nice. Thank you.
yes, thank you.
Okay. Sharaji, one more question I have, Mr. Ohmura.
Yes.
You have mentioned about new services concept in your presentation, like industrial robot in factory, telemedicine. So what we would like to know from regulator perspective, how you have tackled the issue of spectrum allocation,
Yes.
and EMF compliance when these services span across multiple vertical sectors. Mr. Ohmura.
So the yes, so the your question is sorry, what about your question, the main point?
Okay. Once again, I'll ask. Say your services like industrial robot in factory, telemedicine.
Yeah.
These services span across various verticals.
Vertical.
Yeah. So how, as a regulator, do you allocate the frequency and ensure EMF compliance?
Oh, so the regulators assigns the 3.7 and 4.5 and 28 gigahertz equally to the all application services. So the telemedicine services introduce 20 gigahertz for the high-speed transmission and latency.
Okay.
Yes. So the regulation is equally to the all applications in Japan.
Right. Thank you.
May I?
Yeah.
So Omura-san,
Yes.
one of the questions, and as you know, with the industry, many times this question comes up that when we go to the millimeter wave, what kind of effect will this have on the health of human beings and the health of life in general with the transmission at such high frequencies? So the question was also that in your experiments, and did your regulator find any reason to redraft the electromagnetic frequency related health issues, say for example for telemedicine? Was there something special required, for instance, for telemedicine from an EMF safety point of view?
Okay. So on the point of the EMF, so the in Japan, case of Japan, so the National Institute studies influence of the 28 gigahertz to the body or child. So there is no problem to introduce the 28 gigahertz band to the IMT services, because restrict the electric power and radius influence to the bodies. So the in Japan ministries they think about there is no problem to introduce the high millimeter waves on the viewpoint of the EMF.
Thank you, Omura-san. Hearing you say it, hearing someone of your experience, and hearing it from a country that has been so diligent with national safety, with human safety, it's quite remarkable. Thank you very much for that answer. Thank you, Mr. Pandey.
Thank you, Omura. One of the participants raised the question: how this 5G spectrum, local 5G local spectrum, has been allocated in Japan? Is it through auction?
Yeah, not to the evaluation method by MIC, not auction.
Not auction. Okay. Thank you. So going ahead with the discussion.
Here, I think we will probably have one or two questions because we are beyond our time now.
Okay, Sharadji. Alawaji, very nicely you have explained the WRC 19 proceedings outcome. So I have a question that 66 to 71 gigahertz band has been identified as the potential IMT band during WRC 19. But in India, as per National Frequency Allocation Plan, this is for radio navigation and inter-satellite communication. So what is your take on that, Alawaji?
Thank you very much, Pandey Saab, for your questions. Definitely during WRC 19, 66 to 71 gigahertz was identified for IMT implementation, and I hope that there is no condition implemented, there is no condition imposed on IMT implementation, since there is no satellite or no adjacent band, some issues are there. So there is no condition imposed on 66 to 71. So the things are open that how we are going to take up this matter, since as per national frequency allocation plan, this is normally kept, or it can be used for high density applications also. And let us see what decision WPC take on this, and what policy matter we can make in this regard. So presently there is no clarity whether we will be going for IMT or how we are going to. This is a matter of a discussion and the interest of the stakeholder in India.
Thank you, Alawa ji. Sir, last question. Last I have. As far as the implementation of 5G is concerned, there are various factors like maturity of technology, availability of ecosystem, infra, etc. But we in India are very sensitive to prices. So, Garg Saab, if you could explain, how do you perceive that as far as 5G implementation is concerned? Garg sir.
Okay, thank you, Pandey. Basically, the TRAI has given its recommendations for the pricing of spectrum in the E band as well as in the V band. And my experience has been that the government, the Department of Telecom, finds it easier to go along with the recommendations of the TRAI because that gives them strength and the support to take a decision in line with the TRAI recommendation of spectrum pricing. And while you have asked this point, the charges for the spectrum in the ERV band for the microwave carriers, that should be viewed along with the socio-economic benefit which the usage of the spectrum will bring. If we talk of economic aspect directly to the exchequer, the growth of traffic which these carriers will allow and the revenue which will grow because of the growth of traffic, so that revenue will bring additional revenue to the exchequer because our spectrum usage charge as well as the license fee are based on a percentage of the revenue as such of the telecom service providers. So once the traffic and the revenue grows, so indirectly the revenue to the government will increase besides the spectrum charges being paid by the users for those carriers. And if I can say that the social benefit which will accrue to the nation will be manifold of that direct economic benefit to the government. This is my take on that.
Thank you, Mr. Garg.
I completely agree with you, sir. While choosing a method for releasing the spectrum, in fact, the focus should be on ensuring maximum benefits for the society and not short-term revenue maximization for the government. But some of the limitations in the present system could be partially overcome by use of these spectrum bands along with some suitable policy measures. So that is the takeaway from this panel discussion. Sorry, Sharat ji, we have overshot by 15 minutes, I think, but over to you now.
And I think I know from the organizers that we might just lose this box because there is a next session coming along. In the few minutes that I have, may I please take this chance on behalf of TSDSI for expressing a deep word of gratitude to Ohmura-san, to Dr. Lee, to Mr. Alawa, to Mr. Garg, to Mr. Pandey, Thank you very much for enlightening us and for such a fantastic discussion on such a wide variety of subjects. I must also very quickly say to the audience, thank you for being such a lovely audience. Jishnu and Mr. Mehrotra, Dr. Corey, your questions are with me, and I'm going to take permission from Ohmura-san and from Mr. Lee and from the other panelists that I'm going to take these questions and write back to you so that you can answer us offline and we can satisfy our audience, which hasn't had the privilege and the benefit of talking to you directly today. But there are always time-related constraints. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone on the dais. Thank you, audience, and thank you, TSDSI, for this excellent evening. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, MC. You can take off the session and you can go to the next session. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, sir. Meet you all in the next session.